What's up guys, this is Tranceportal in the studio with me, EverLight. And in today's episode, I'm going to be talking to you all about using grooves and riffs more effectively in your productions. So many new producers get so wrapped up in the technical side of music production that they forget to experiment and implement with some of the simplest and most powerful songwriting tools available. So in this episode, I'm going to be exploring some of my own productions and showing you how I've used grooves and riff melodies in those tracks to really set them apart and make them unique and original. Let's get stuck straight in. So here we are inside of Ableton. I have one of my favorite productions loaded up in front of me. This is Tender, which is a track me and Tasso made under our alias The Resistance. So I'm going to be talking about using grooves and riffs more effectively, specifically using call and response in grooves. So call and response makes tracks more interesting as the listener, their attention will be constantly shifting between one element to the next, and as they listen, they'll be enjoying the patterns that develop from the interactions they have with the rest of the track. It can make a complex track more easily absorbed and appreciated by the average listener, as opposed to just having a wall of constant layers all going on all at once. So if your elements have some kind of programmed interaction, some kind of awareness of each other as they go throughout the track, then that's going to be way more interesting than just having like 5 different groove layers that are all doing their own thing, stepping on each other's toes and not really making much sense. So first of all, we're going to be looking at the groove elements in this track. Okay, so here we are looking at the intro, so I'm going to play a little bit of that. And now the 3 elements we're looking at here are this synth rumble thing, this stabby sawtooth wave lead, and then my hydrosynth sound, which is playing a weird sort of synth whistle thing. So I've isolated all 3 of those. This is what they sound like. Can probably already hear that they have a cohesive groove to them. So what I mean by that is that the notes by which, the timings on which they play are all done purposefully so that they fill in each other's gaps, and that creates an overall cohesive groove where the listener can kind of hop from one element to the next, and it keeps them entertained. So just to demonstrate that in a bit more detail, we've got the initial saw lead, which is kind of like the most prominent thing in this bit, and then when that stops in this gap here, we have got the synth whistle. And then underneath all of that, we've got this rumbly kind of synth that sounds almost percussive, that kind of fills in the gaps even more. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that that is intentional. That was not done by accident. Now, when you're programming your grooves, they don't have to be perfect, like in terms of every single note has to be separate. You can have some notes overlap. Like you can see here that I've got the timings on this one here. And also like this one steps on the toes of this one a little bit. And that's absolutely fine. But the key thing to remember is that roughly they are slotted together into each other. And it creates a more pleasant listening experience for the listener. So the other main thing I wanted to speak about in this episode is how to use riffs. So using riffs can often be far more effective than writing big complex melodies, as they're more easy to remember. I see a lot of producers trying to stand out, so trying to make their music sound more original, and the way they do that is to write increasingly complex melodies. But actually, riffs are far more flexible than writing complex melodies, and they are far easier to remember as well. So because of that, writing simpler melodic riffs and getting creative with the types of sounds that you use is a far more effective strategy for making yourself stand out, and you have more flexibility the simpler you get in terms of the patterns used as well as the sounds that they're paired with. So I'm going to show you a riff from this track, the main riff from this track, just to demonstrate what I'm saying. It's super simple, super straightforward, but it works. And then I'm going to move on to another track and show you all the riffs from those tracks too. So the riff I'm showing you here is the main sawtooth sustained lead sound, and I'll play it for you. It's this.
That's all it is. That's all the riff is. It's 4 notes. Simple kind of long sustained note, and then right at the end of the phrase it goes up on the key scale, and then it returns back to normal. That's all that it is. Super simple, super effective. It doesn't need to do loads. And that's just an example of, you know, it's okay to keep it simple. You don't, like, I haven't written some big soaring lead or anything, but because of the style of the track is very driving, it's very focused, just having that big aggressive sound with those melodies, that simple melody, is way more effective. Okay, so I know a lot of you that produce uplifting are probably watching this at the moment and going, well, you know, that's all well and good for simple tech trance and techno and stuff, but what about uplifting trance? Well, the exact same thing applies, and I'm going to show you here. This is an uplifting remix I did of Facade Our Reptilian Overlords. It was a free track that was released on No Remorse. So go and check that out. So this is an uplifting track, and I wanted to show you just how the call and response, the grooves slot together in this track, and also what I've done with the riff of this track as well, which again is super simple, but it has a bit of a twist which is going to be applicable to uplifting tracks that have overarching chord progressions. So let's get stuck straight into the intro. I'm going to play it from here. Just take a quick listen. Now you can probably already hear exactly what I'm talking about. I am of course talking about the sub lead and the kind of like the weird floaty lead that we've got going on, and then the chord stabs. So I've isolated them. They sound like this. And again, similar to the last track, I have made space in the note arrangements of these two different sections so that they can slot together. And then when you put that on top of the overall mix with the rest of the track, with the pads underneath and the chord progression, you'll notice actually, and this refers back to the riffs as well, which we're exploring also, that the riff is the same and the underlying chord progression changes. So what you're hearing is you're hearing this simple repeatable riff which sounds like this. And that just repeats over and over. There's no chord progression underneath it, but it's in the key scale of the track. So what's now happening is you've got that simple riff, which is catchy and repeatable. And on top of that, you also have the gaps in it, which are being answered by this other sound. And then on top of that, you have an underlying chord progression, which is constantly shifting and changing, and it gives the main riff more context. So it makes it sound more pleasant because you've got lots going on that all fits together nicely. So just to demonstrate that, I'll put the bass underneath and you can hear how that sounds. So this is tying in both of today's lessons. So we're looking at the groove, which is the call and response happening between both of those elements there, and we're looking at the riff, which is a simple repeatable catchy riff that just goes on and on and on. And because it's an uplifting track, it's got that chord progression underneath, which is actually enhanced by the simple riff going on over the top of it. There's no complex melodies here. It's all simple and straightforward stuff, and that underlying chord progression ties all of the riffs together and gives them a nice context for the listener. One thing that's also worth quickly mentioning about those two sounds is the sound design of them, which you probably would have noticed is quite contrasting. So you have your standard kind of, I call them Paul Van Dyke stabs, right? So they sound like this. right, those ones. And then underneath you've got this weird floaty kind of almost metallic sound. And again, that was intentional. The reason being is because, similar to how call and response, it will grab a listener's attention, having contrasting sounds that are doing the call and response is super effective as well. Okay, so we're moving on to the main section of this track. I'm going to give that a little bit of a play. This time we're focusing on the main super saw chord stab melody, and I'll play that for you now. So here we're talking about the main lead riff. I'm going to isolate that for you here. It's actually two different layers, this one and this one. Now here, when I use the term riff, I'm not necessarily referring to the notes specifically. Here I'm talking about the pattern of the notes, the general theme that's going on, which is this that riff, that rhythm, that kind of style of note where it goes up and then down, like that. That goes on throughout the entire chord progression here. It changes slightly to kind of better fit with the underlying chords that's going on, but for the most part that rhythm and that style is present throughout the entire phrase. So I'll play that again just to kind of show you what I mean. You can even see it here in the notes. I'll point it out to you that way. So it goes down, up and down, up and down. And then as the chord progression changes here, that stays the same. But when this no longer works or gets boring because it is too repeatable, when it goes into the next section of the phrase, the notes change, but the general theme, as in going up and then down, and the rhythm of the notes, the timings of the notes, are the same still. And then it returns back to the notes that were at the beginning before it then loops around and goes back to the beginning of the phrase. So when I'm writing big melodic uplifting trance like this, that's what I'm aiming to do. I'm aiming to have a cohesive rhythm or timings of the notes and a cohesive system or style of the way the notes move around within the chord progression to create something that is complex but still simple and still easy to remember. It needs to have that simple thread that goes throughout the entire track. And when you're writing uplifting trance, that can be super effective in making your music stand out, actually, because a lot of uplifting trance is overly complex, and actually bringing it back a little bit and being more restrained with your melodies can be way more effective and allow people to really connect with the music in a better way. And guys, I could do this all day. I literally have stacks and stacks of my discography that all use similar methods, but unfortunately I've run out of time. I really hope that you have gotten deeper understanding of how to use these simple songwriting tools to more effectively write better music. Guys, thank you for watching. This has been Tranceportal in the studio with me, EverLight. Do not forget to subscribe to the Tranceportal YouTube channels and check us out on our socials. I'll see you all again next time.